The air inside the mountain tastes of cold ash and centuries of trapped silence. Solydros pushed the heavy stone slab aside, the sound echoing like a dying breath through the hollowed chamber. He stepped onto the floor, his boots stirring thick, gray dust that had not moved for an age. Above, the ceiling vanished into darkness, supported by rib-like arches of jagged obsidian that seemed to pulse with a faint, unnatural rhythm. He checked the perimeter. No side passages, no way back out once the seal was set. The chamber was a tomb designed for a single purpose. He took 3 paces toward the center, his hand resting on the hilts at his sides. Then, the shadows shifted. A mass of white marrow and black, fused bone detached itself from the far wall, unfolding with a sound like grinding tectonic plates. It stood nearly twice his height, a towering nightmare of shifting shadow and calcified malice. The bone-sworn entity did not breathe, yet the air in the room grew heavy and stagnant, pressing against his lungs. It turned its head, and the silence of the chamber deepened, hardening into a threat that made the very ground beneath his feet feel brittle. Solydros did not wait for an invitation. He drew his twin blades, the steel ringing out, a sharp, metallic scream that shattered the stillness. He lunged, closing the distance in a heartbeat, and drove his steel deep into the entity's chest. For a second, he felt the resistance of bone, then the crunch of shattering marrow, but there was no spray of blood. Instead, black smoke hissed from the wound, thick and suffocating. The jagged bone edges writhed, knitting together with unnatural speed, sealing the wound before he could even pull his blades free. The entity countered instantly, a massive forearm elongated, transforming into a serrated blade that carved a deep trench into the stone floor. Solydros rolled, the impact of the strike sending tremors through his feet. He scrambled backward, his boots sliding on the slick, dusty floor. The creature did not stop. It moved with a fluid, terrifying grace, driving him toward the jagged wall of the chamber. Every strike Solydros threw was met with a wall of bone or absorbed by the shifting shadow. He was no longer the hunter. He was a frantic shadow darting between heavy, bone-crushing blows that left the air vibrating with power. Solydros hit the wall, the stone biting into his shoulder blades. There was nowhere left to retreat. The entity loomed, a mountain of shifting bone and shadow that blocked out the dim light. He braced his feet, his muscles coiled tight, ready to parry or die. Then he saw it. Before the entity swung its massive arm, its shadow flickered on the floor, a dark, jagged motion that preceded the physical blow by a fraction of a second. It was a silent herald, a warning written in ink on the cold stone. Solydros narrowed his eyes, tracking the darkness. He stopped trying to strike blindly. Instead, he watched the floor. The entity reared back, its bone arm lengthening, and the shadow darted to the left, a heartbeat early. Solydros did not flinch. He let the air out of his lungs in a slow, steady stream, his hands loosening their grip just enough to react. He was no longer fighting the creature. He was reading the rhythm of its intent. He stood perfectly still, a statue of nerves and grit, waiting for the shadow to reveal the final, lethal path. The entity shifted. The shadow moved. Solydros locked his gaze on the opening. The massive bone limb descended, carving a path through the air with a low, whistling hum. Solydros did not retreat. He waited until the last heartbeat, then lunged forward. He caught the massive arm with his left blade. The force of the impact jarred his teeth, but he held his ground. With his right hand, he pivoted, his blade sliding along the bone structure and sinking into the precise, exposed gap within the creature's core. The entity froze. The momentum of the strike died instantly. Solydros drove both blades deeper, twisting them until the marrow groaned. The creature shuddered. It did not bleed. It disintegrated. A violent, concussive shockwave of black ash erupted outward, slamming into Solydros and hurling him backward across the chamber. He hit the cold stone floor. The breath knocked from his lungs. Around him, the entity collapsed, its form shattering into 1,000 brittle, lifeless fragments that clattered against the obsidian floor like falling glass. The secondary creatures followed, crumbling into mounds of gray dust. The chamber groaned. The ceiling began to fracture. and the oppressive weight that had filled the air finally broke, replaced by the sound of shifting stone and the silence of a tomb. Solydros pushed himself up from the debris, his limbs heavy with exhaustion. The ceiling continued to groan, shedding stone and dust like rain. He ignored the pain in his side and forced his legs to move, stumbling toward the jagged sliver of light that marked the exit. He scrambled over fallen pillars and through clouds of suffocating ash, his lungs burning with every jagged breath. He broke through the threshold, collapsing onto the cold, hard earth of the outside world. Behind him, the mountain groaned one final time and settled into a heavy, unnatural silence. He lay there for a long moment, watching the dim light of dusk crawl across the landscape. The threat was gone. The chamber was a grave. He stood, his knees trembling, and turned his back on the mountain. He took one step, then stopped. A faint, rhythmic pulse vibrated through the soles of his boots. He looked down at the dirt, half buried in the loose grit. A single, jagged fragment of white bone twitched. It jerked once, then again, a persistent, mechanical motion. The entity had been destroyed, but the oath remained, pulsing beneath the earth, waiting for the silence to break.